All right, hello everyone, and welcome to today's training workshop. We are going to be talking about the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area Interpretive Plan. So as a reminder, I am recording this so that partners can watch it later who are unable to be here. And I will be taking questions at the end. So as we go along, if you have a question, please type it in the chat box so you don't forget it. And I will answer them when we get to questions, but we have a lot to cover, and to try to expedite that, I want to try to get through everything and then open it up for questions. So if you have questions, type them in the chat and I will answer them at the end of the workshop. I'm going to share my screen here.
Recording.
Okay. Again, I'm going to ask everyone to please mute their screens so we don't have any excess noise. All right, Sarah, can you see that okay? And give me a thumbs up. Can you hear me okay? All right, fabulous. All right. So you see that in full screen? Okay, wonderful. All right, everyone. So I'm going to give you a little background on the interpretive plan and how it came to be. So the original interpretive plan, which is the one on the left, was created in 2014. It was created in collaboration with a group of individuals or an ad hoc committee. And so it was created many years ago. And it happened shortly after our management plan from the National Park Service was approved. And a lot of what we're going to be reviewing today didn't change from the old interpretive plan, but we did update some things. For instance, some of the ways we're telling stories in the heritage area have changed in that time. And I don't want to go any further without crediting the group of people who helped to work on this interpretive plan. As many of you know, most of what we do in the heritage area, we do in collaboration with our partners. And so there was an ad hoc committee of individuals who worked on revising the interpretation plan. And those people were Tim Townsend from the National Park Service at Lincoln Home, Ann Mosley from the Sangamon Experience at University of Illinois, Sue Richter from the Vermilion County Museum, and Pat Kane from the Museum of the Grand Prairie, as well as staff from Looking for Lincoln. And the other person that deserves credit for the interpretive plan is Dr. Brian Andresen, who was very instrumental in writing the interpretive themes. And many of the things that we're going to be talking about today, like the desired interpretive experiences and the methodology and the interpretive themes, came directly out of Looking for Lincoln and the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area's management plan. So without any further ado, I want to dive into our revised interpretive plan today. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to talk about what is currently in the interpretive plan, and at the end, a little bit about how you could implement it in your heritage area. So not your heritage area, in your community. So we're going to get started here. And I wanted to start by explaining what interpretation is. The first definition is probably my favorite because it's the most basic. It's a way of telling stories and addressing why that story matters. And then we have the official. Ooh, I think someone unmuted. Okay. And then we have the National Association of Interpretations definition, which is a mission-based communication process that forges emotional and intellectual connections between the interests of the audience and the meaning of inherent in the resource. So that is really what we're going to be talking about today is interpretation, what it is, and how we use it. Now, this is really a collage of pictures from around the National Heritage Area that show how interpretation is currently done. We have wayside exhibits that talk about Lincoln and his impact. We have Lincoln interpreters who come and talk and tell stories about his life and times. We have historic sites. We have first-person interpretation. We have interactive exhibits. We have normal exhibits. We have first and third person interpretation. And all of this is taking place in the heritage area on a daily basis. And these are just how the stories are being told. And so the interpretive plan isn't meant to replace any of the things that are already going on. It's just meant to enhance it, which leads us to our purpose. So the purpose of the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area Interpretive Plan is to assist and guide looking for Lincoln communities as they enhance and develop the stories of Lincoln's life and times. And that is really what it's here to do, is to assist and help, and maybe start conversations that you haven't had in your communities yet about the stories you're telling and how you could potentially enhance and improve the telling of those stories. So there are 3 parts to our interpretive plan. The first part outlines the interpretive framework for telling stories in the heritage area. Part 2 serves as a step-by-step guide for communities to create effective interpretation of their natural, cultural, and historical resources. And that's really the section we're going to spend the most time in today. And then part 3 is basically a basic step on marketing those stories and experiences that are available to communities. And it's those unique stories that drive people to come to our communities and to help foster community development and community identity into who we are. It connects back to the stories that we tell. Okay, so what we're going to do now is basically work through the 3 parts of the interpretive plan. You should have received a copy of it. I'm not going to go into great detail about what's there. It's going to be more like an overview of what is in the interpretive plan and how it can be utilized in your community. You can go through the interpretive plan on your own in more detail later, but this is meant to be kind of an introduction and overview to what is there. And several of the sections have worksheets, and we're going to briefly talk about those, but those are things that you can work through in your community, in your historic site, and delve more into at a later date. But if you have questions about them, again, please put them in the chat, and I will try to answer those at the end today. All right. All right, so we're going to start with the desired interpretive experience for all visitors and residents. So what are we, as Looking for Lincoln and the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area, hoping visitors will come away with when they visit the heritage area? To learn about the details of Lincoln's early life and times, to create interest in answering the question, who was Lincoln? Think of him more as a person. Relate events of Lincoln's life to the authentic places where it happened. We talk a lot in our heritage area about walking in Lincoln's footsteps, and that's what we want the visitor to kind of come away with. Relate experiences of Lincoln's life on a national context, or, how did the events that happened here in Central Illinois affect Lincoln and the residents that lived here who interacted with him? To understand the national significant issues that were under debate at the time. One of them, of course, would be slavery and how complex that issue is and the different people that had different views on that. And then relate these nationally significant stories back to what's happening today and how it impacts us. So if a visitor comes and visits your site, they should learn about the past, but they should also walk away with, why is that important or relevant for me today? And that is what we hope the desired interpretive experience is for people who visit the heritage area. Okay, here's our methodology. Now, these are things that we should strive to do, and there's a long list of them. And if you look in the interpretive plan, there's several pages of these. But again, I'm just highlighting parts of each of these things that you can go back and look at in more detail later. So the quality of interpretation in the heritage area, we hope that this is what we do, which is we tell each story where it happened in tangible, real place, something that happened where we're talking about it. And we strive for those stories to be accurate, that they are well researched. And if a story is legend or lore or something that happened in your community, that it's talked about like that, that the fact that it's acknowledged that this is oral tradition of what happened with Lincoln or whoever you're talking about, and that the quality of the stories would be good. So they're told in a good, well, they're told in a way that is able to communicate. So there's a good quality to the story and it follows good interpretive guidelines. And that we set these stories in context within the time in which they happened, and that they connect to the broader themes and bigger pictures of what was going on at the time that Lincoln lived. Also, significance and meaning. So interpretation goes beyond just telling the facts of a story. It draws connections and significance and meaning to its audiences. And connections. This is something we talk about a lot at Looking for Lincoln, which is connecting local stories to other stories in other communities in the heritage area. And we hope that you're doing that in your community. Lincoln wasn't just a lawyer in one community. He was a lawyer in many communities, and there's lots of shared stories and experiences because of that. For experiential learning, we emphasize communication that's visual, hands-on, something that's more than just reading a wayside or a text panel. Opportunities explore, allowing opportunities for visitors to explore on your sites, as well as within communities to kind of walk in Lincoln's footsteps. Also, for depth of information, primary interpretive content shouldn't be super long. It should be succinct, well written. It conveys in a short amount of text a key message or context and connections. And it also will show various different points of view. So including multiple perspectives as interpretation is something we want to strive for. And a shared human experience. So we want to provide interpretation that helps audiences relate to the experiences in their lives. And we need to acknowledge the unpleasant. Some stories are very difficult to tell, but that doesn't mean we don't strive to tell them in an appropriate way. And last but not least, for opportunities to engage and support, we want to have audiences be aware of what the heritage area is striving to do and the programs that are offering and how they can engage with those things. Now we have several interpretive initiatives in the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area. And these are the ones that we chose to highlight specifically in the interpretive plan. Probably the most popular program we've ever created, Bring a Lincoln to Your Community program, is where we help subsidize a Lincoln coming to a community to do a program, to be part of an event, to kind of share the Lincoln story. We have over 260, with more currently under production, wayside exhibits that tell stories of Lincoln scattered throughout the landscape of the heritage area. We also have a book series that tells stories of when Lincoln lived here. We currently have 4 in the series: Lincoln Springfield, Lincoln in Mormon Country, A Guide to Lincoln's 8th Judicial Circuit, and Historic Houses in Lincoln's, Illinois. We also have a program called Looking for Lincoln Conversations, and Looking for Lincoln Conversations is a virtual program that we hold once a month, where we have a speaker come in and talk about something connected to Lincoln's life and times. Sometimes it might be a first-person interpreter. Sometimes it might be a program about, we've done programs on preservations of the Mount Pulaski Courthouse, on learning more about historic sites, on Lincoln and his family. So something that relates to Lincoln. And this is actually created quite a collection of stories that we archive on our YouTube channel that people can listen to and go back and learn about Lincoln's life and times here in Illinois. We also have something called Looking for Lincoln Stories, which has not yet been released, but will be in the forthcoming shortly, hopefully, which is a podcast / documentary series that talks about stories of Lincoln's life and times. Particularly, the first one is going to be about the Atlanta barbecue, which tells the story of a celebration of the Emancipation Proclamation Declaration in September of 1875. And they had a big event in the community of Atlanta. But if you were to go there today, you wouldn't see anything in the community that talks about it. And so this is one of the ways we're trying to tell stories that have been forgotten or often are very much unknown outside of the community in which they took place. And last but not least, we have some traveling exhibits that promote that as well. And the one that we currently are offering to our communities is the Illinois Freedom Project, which was developed in collaboration with Lincoln Home National Historic Site. Interpretive opportunities that communities can take advantage of. We have the African American Civil Rights Network, which for those of you who don't know, it was authorized in 2017 and is managed through the National Park Service. And they are trying to document and tell stories connected to the American Civil Rights Movement. We have the National Association of Interpretation, which has a certified interpretive guide program. And over the last several years, there have been several interpretive workshops that people could have been taken advantage of pre-COVID. And those are things that we try to promote. They also, National Association of Interpretation also has several other resources available, not just interpretive guides, to help communities with and sites with developing interpretation. So that is something that we promote as well. And then also several of our sites, including the one pictured here, are designated as part of the National Underground Railroad Network to Freedom, which is also managed by the National Park Service, which documents and tells stories connected to the Underground Railroad. And if anyone would like more information about any of these three designations / organizations, if you wanted to send me an email afterward, I would be happy to send you more information on them if that's something your community would like to take better advantage of. All right, now we're going to talk about the heritage area's interpretive themes. So everything we do fits within the broad caveat of Abraham Lincoln's life and times. But we have 4 specific themes that we focus on. I'm going to talk about these in a little bit more detail in a minute. But we have Lincoln the Man, critical issues in telling the story of Lincoln's America, Illinois' influence on Lincoln, and Lincoln's legacy. So under Lincoln the Man, we have Lincoln the Pioneer. So as many of you know, Abraham Lincoln arrived in Illinois as a young man with his parents as a pioneer coming to Illinois. And he spent his early years in New Salem, where he lived in a frontier town. And in many ways, Springfield, Illinois would be considered a frontier town when Lincoln lived there in the 1830s, 40s, and as well. We also tell the story of Lincoln as a husband, father, and a community member in Springfield, Illinois. We talk a lot about Lincoln the politician, both Lincoln while he was actually serving in the Illinois legislature and also running for the US Senate, and then of course as president, but also politics that he gave as political speeches when he wasn't a candidate, but he was very involved in politics. We talk about Lincoln the lawyer, his profession, what he did to earn money. And of course, we talk about Lincoln the president. All right. We talk about critical issues in telling the story of Lincoln's America. So we talk a little bit, and this is something that we're even expanding now, about equality and race, specifically slavery and the issues that Lincoln faced, both in the White House, but also before that, and just in living in 19th century America in Illinois. We talk about the meaning of the Declaration of Independence. What does it mean when it says that all men are created equal? Kind of talk about that. We also talk about the Underground Railroad in Illinois. Illinois had a very intricate Underground Railroad network, and we talk about the different communities and individuals that were involved in that. We also talk about Illinois and the Civil War. And then there's Illinois' influence on Lincoln, because Illinois and the individuals that lived here had pivotal were very pivotal in shaping who Lincoln became. So we talk about it being the land of opportunity. It was the frontier. Many of the people that Lincoln rubbed shoulders with came from the East, hoping to make their fortunes or have more opportunities here on the frontier than where they were born. The people. So who are the people Lincoln interacted with? His friends, his family, his clients. And we also talk about the social and political landscape of Illinois and the nation. So those are the different types of things that we're talking about, as well as Lincoln's legacy. So Lincoln's imprint on America. He is by far, Abraham Lincoln is by far one of the most beloved presidents in American history. And how does that shape our vision of him? Myth and memory. Lincoln remembered. How we think about Lincoln and how he is remembered here. That's something we can talk about, as well as Lincoln's legacy, both in Illinois, because we are the land of Lincoln, but also to us as the nation. So those are the interpretive themes that, and there's a lot more detail on those in the Interpretive Plan. Please go and take a look at those in detail. That is an overview of the interpretive themes for the heritage area. Take a drink here. All right, part 2, community interpretive development. And we're going to spend the bulk of our time walking through this section, because this is a section that is very interactive with you and your community as you try to figure out what stories you want to tell and how you, and look at the stories you are telling and how perhaps you could change those or enhance those. All right, so there are 5-step process that we've created to creating a successful interpretation. And so each of these steps has multiple things for you to work through in the workbook. So we're going to be talking about them. And those are defining significance, developing stories, considering an audience, choosing media, and evaluating your strategy. Okay, and as a reminder, I wanted to remind us again what interpretation is, because we're going to be throwing this word around a lot. So it's a way of telling stories and addressing why that story matters. And it's a mission-based communication process that forges emotional and intellectual connections between the interests of an audience and meaning inherent in the resource. So that begs the question, what is a resource? So a resource is a natural, historic, or cultural asset found in a community. It could be a site, a service, a historical event, a landscape that has a role in telling an important story. All right, and then we have a stakeholder, an individual within a community who has a vested interest in the success of the project. But I want to go back to Reese for a second. So this is a picture from New Salem. And if you've ever been out to New Salem, it's a very picturesque village. But the importance of this site is really because the sites are not, the location is original, but the historic structures aren't. But the historic structures give you an idea of what it would have been like for Lincoln to live at this time. And so the site itself is a cultural asset because it helps you think about that. It takes you and helps transport a visitor back in time to that time period. Okay. All right. So the process of creating interpretation always begins with some questions. So why would a visitor want to experience your resource in the first place? Why would they come to visit you? And why and what at your site makes it relevant to them? And how does your resource help other people understand the life and times of Abraham Lincoln? And perhaps it's what happened there, or the people it's associated with, or maybe it's an important part of local culture or lore. But these places or things have something important stories to tell. So interpretation describes the significant places, events, and people and things. And to understand its significance, you need to ask yourself, why should people care about your resource? And this question may have one or many answers, because a resource could be significant for more than one reason. So Why should people care about your resource? It could be people, it could be scenery, it could be architecture, it could be a core event or trend that happened there. These are all things that make your site or could make your site significant. So we have developed a worksheet for the communities to work through to figure out what is significant about your resource. So they ask some of the questions I just asked you. Why would a visitor want to experience my resource in the first place? What makes it relevant? How does my resource help others to understand the life and times of Abraham Lincoln? And it gives you some questions about the people and scenery and architecture and event or trend. So what happened there? Why is it important? And so as you begin to work through the worksheet, it'll generate ideas and help you to figure out or clarify. I'm sure many of you already know why your site's significant, but it would be a good exercise to think about, well, what else could we be talking about? So it's important to link your resource to the big picture. It's basically to connect the dots for your visitor. To find something common that threads your resource to a bigger story. And so one way to do this is to do the Y exercise, creating context for a resource. Now, in the interpretive plan, we have probably one of my favorite examples, the Lincoln slept here example, because in Illinois, you can travel many places and they would say that Abraham Lincoln spent a night here at some point. So the question is, if you're trying to figure out creating context, you ask yourself, you state a fact, and then you ask yourself a series of why questions. So I'm going to illustrate. So, and this one I took straight out of the interpretive plan. So fact, in my community, we have a home that Lincoln would visit each time he was in town. That could apply to many communities in the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area. So why? This home belonged to one of Lincoln's friends, and each time he was in town, he would visit the homeowner who would offer him a room to rest for the evening. Why? Lincoln was in town frequently because he was a lawyer, so he would travel to various communities in order to work cases at local courthouses. And the last why? Because Lincoln traveled on the 8th Judicial Circuit throughout his life, county seats would host both judges and lawyers who would travel to hear and present local cases. So conclusion, this resource in my community would fit into the life and times of Abraham Lincoln. And specifically, it would connect with the interpretive theme, Lincoln the man and Lincoln the lawyer. I would also argue it could connect to the people, because if he was staying in the home of a friend of his, it would connect to the people that Lincoln knew. So the exercise is basically designed to get you to think through the stories that you tell and connect it to the interpretive themes. And here's the worksheet. So it's connecting your resource to our interpretive themes. And so we have this in the workbook for you to work through and think about how your resource site connects to the greater stories being told in the Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area. All right. Storytelling, probably my favorite part. So storytelling is a powerful tool to convey sharing ideas, beliefs, values, and traditions. So stories are very effective in explaining the meaning of things. We all learn through storytelling. And interpretation is basically storytelling. It's weaving a story about places and things that happened and the people it happened to. So once you have identified the significance of your resource and how it connects to the themes, you can begin grouping your stories into the various different themes, which different resources could fit in multiple themes. It isn't like your site only has to fit into one theme. It can fit into multiple themes. And themes create the foundation for storytelling to increase visitors' understanding and appreciation of communities' resources. And themes create a platform for stories to work together to send visitors a carefully coordinated and crafted message about the resources. When developing themes, be diligent to ensure that they emphasize the significance about your resource without repeating the same story everyone else has. And I chose a courthouse for this because there are many Looking for Lincoln communities that have a story about Lincoln serving as a lawyer in their community, and various different stories. And while there's similarities between some of these, there are also individual stories with different people and different places. And so it's important to not get caught up in the broad story, but telling the specific story that happened at the specific place that you're trying to tell that story. Okay, developing local themes. So you figured out how what you're doing connects to the broader stories of the heritage area. Now you can work on developing your local story. So you can make a list of all the important things that happened. And some of those things probably have nothing to do with Abraham Lincoln. And that's okay, because it's your community's story. So what we're talking about is kind of a two-tier system. You have the stories that connect to the heritage area, then you have the stories that are about your community. So for instance, if you're in a historical society or a local history museum and you tell the story of a county or a specific place, you're going to tell stories that happen in your community and county that have nothing to do with Abraham Lincoln. But the same principles apply in telling the story. But the guide is really meant to help focus on the ones that connect to Lincoln, but also help you develop those sub-stories as well. So you can make a list of important stories and sort them into groups. And many of these stories are going to feature tangible elements, those things that people can see or touch. And it's important to write those down and keep a list of those. And then what is the meaning of your stories? And you can identify their significance. How is it relevant to your community? How does it relate to your community story or your community history? And then also, once the stories and significance are identified, you can start with some broad concepts, like your big ideas, because what you're getting towards is theme development. So you're working on developing what the themes are of the stories that you're telling. And then we have our next worksheet, which is writing theme statements. So basically what I just explained is on this worksheet. So you start with a general topic, what you want to talk to your audience about. Then you get more specific. My resource relates to this topic by, and then you think your theme. After seeing my presentation, what do you want your audience to know or remember about it? What is the common link between the resources? And then you can start writing like a sub-theme. What other connections exist between the resource and the theme? And how do these themes complement the heritage area? And again, some of them may not if they're not directly related to the stories that we're telling, but the basic concept of interpretation is the same. Then you develop your theme statement with sub-theme statements. And there's, like I said, a lot more detail in the actual interpretive plan than I am providing, but this is meant to be more like an overview and explain what's there. All right, so next step, number 4, is considering your audience. Did I skip one? No, there it is. Okay. So the more you know about your visitors and their needs, the more you can effectively communicate with them. So before implementing your interpretation, you need to know who comes to your site, and are those people that come for the day? Are they families? Are they school groups? And it might be a mix of all of the above. Are they people on vacation? So who is coming to your site and what types of interpretation are they looking for? Are they looking for more interactive exhibits? Are they looking to learn more about Lincoln? Are they wanting to learn more about their history or their family history? And these are things you need to think about. Also, in considering your audience is figuring out how to meet your visitors' expectations. Now, typically when a visitor comes to a historic site, they're coming there to learn something of value, something that they can take home and enhance what they know about the world. They're not just visiting to look at a tangible resource, but also to learn more about it and why it affects them and how it's helped in society. So most people are going to spend less than an hour focusing on your interpretation, and it's probably less than that. And although they might stay longer, they will be looking for other things to capture your attention. So maybe if you have a couple historic sites that are all close together, you can collaborate and come up with something that thematically connects so that you can keep them in your community longer. And you look for ways to complement what your visitors will experience. Perhaps if you're specifically wanting to target families, perhaps you make a scavenger hunt among a couple different sites and connect the children, like so that the kids can go visit the different sites to do the scavenger hunt and get a prize, something that will encourage families to visit your site. So you need to think about your audience and think about what their needs are. Because if you have a family, maybe taking an hour tour of a historic home may not be the best way to keep kids interested in your site. Step 4, which is choosing the media. So what types of interpretive media will you use? So once you've decided on the stories to tell and how to tell them, it's time to figure out your interpretive media. So is it going to be signs like our wayside exhibits? Is it going to be banners like we have illustrated here in the picture from the Illinois Freedom Project? They're easy to transport, and they're relatively inexpensive, and they can be complemented with many other things like programming. So that's, if you don't have a lot of money, that is a viable option. Is it electronic media? Is it a podcast or a kiosk or a handheld device? Is it personal interpretation? Is it someone that's talking at your site in either third person or first person? Is it an interpretive exhibit? Is it a web-based interpretation? So something that's online and interactive. Is it a walking tour, whether it's just following signs or you're listening to a podcast on walking tour or doing something interactive on your phone? All of those are things to think about. And then there's, of course, many other types of interpretation that you could do. These are just some that we have highlighted. Now, things to consider when choosing how you're going to interpret your story, what media to use. Budget is a big one. Most of us do not have endless amounts of money to spend on interpretation. It would be lovely if we did. So you need to think about that. Maybe it'd be really cool to do a very expensive interactive exhibit, but you don't have that kind of fund. So that's something that you shouldn't even consider. When you decide on what you're going to do you have adequate staff and volunteer involvement to pull it off? What type of technology are you going to use? What type of story are you telling? Are you telling a story that lends itself better to a first-person interpreter or an exhibit? And how you want to communicate that? Is it an activity? Would an activity incorporated be something that would be a good way of telling your story? Is it accessible to many people with different challenges and needs? Or is it accessible so that different people can understand what's going on? What are the maintenance requirements and sustainability? And this is something that a lot of communities can talk about with their wayside exhibits. Some of our wayside exhibits have been in our landscape for over a decade, and they are in need of being replaced. It'd be lovely if you can just buy a sign once and put it out and it would be there forever. But those things that you do will require maintenance, and are they sustainable? And these are things you need to think about as you are developing your interpretation on your site. And last but not least is evaluating the strategy. So creating interpretation isn't we're going to do it once and be done. It is a process that requires ongoing commitment to maintain interest at your sites. If you haven't updated your exhibits in over a decade, it's not going to bring people back over and over and over. Okay. So are you meeting the goals of what you want your visitors to learn and connect with? When they go through their site, what are you hoping they're going to come away with? These are questions that you need to be thinking about. And what outcomes are you hoping? So if they do your program or come to your workshop or different things like that, how is this beneficial to them? Does it matter to them? Has it made a difference? Are they thinking about things differently than they were before they came to your site? Okay, so these are things you need to think about. Outcomes of interpretive programming will reflect some kind of change in your visitors. Maybe they think about Abraham Lincoln in a different way, or maybe they think about the Underground Railroad or slavery or something different by going through your site. So what do your visitors think? So there are two types of information that you can gather: quantitative versus qualitative. So quantitative is like your statistics, your numbers. How many people came through your site? How many people are paying attention? How many people are downloading and watching your virtual programming you have online? There's those things to consider. Then there's qualitative. What attitudes do people have about your site? What are their perceptions and feelings of your visitors? That's very subjective and much harder to obtain. And you can collect this information in either two ways. You can observe visitors and how they're interacting in your site. And you can also do things that take more time, like interviews, focus groups, questionnaires, and actually get input from visitors. But again, that takes staffing, time, and it also takes the visitor stopping to actually participate. All right, we are up to part 3 of the interpretive plan: marketing tools and support. So if you were to go to the marketing section in the interpretive plan, there's a bunch of information listed on things that we offer. And so I put pictures of several of them on this slide. We have our print media, so we have our visitor guide, we have our website, we have our Flat Lincoln road trip social media campaigns, we have Flat Lincoln, we have us going to events. This one happens to be at the State Fair, talking about the heritage area and all there is to offer in our communities. We have online virtual programs like our Filled to the Brim series, which is really a promotion marketing series that we offer that highlights different stories connected to different communities to encourage visitation. So there are lots of tools available to communities, and I will put a plug in now. We have a bunch of training workshops on marketing, including Flat Lincoln and how to market on a small budget on our YouTube channel under training workshops. So that this is something you're interested in. We already have several pre-recorded workshops with information on these things that you can take advantage of. So one of the worksheets we have is promotion opportunities, and it really gets you thinking about planning. So you have a wonderful story, you're telling it well, but how do you actually get visitors to your site? And so this worksheet really walks you through how to do that. What is the benefit? Who are you trying to target as your audience? How are you going to communicate your message to your audience? And how are you going to handle the visitors when they come? And so that's kind of the information that you work through on this worksheet. And then we have a basic marketing plan. If Steve, our marketing consultant, was here, he would tell you you always need to have a plan. So you have a program name. What's the message going to be? Who's your target audience? Plan promotions, action steps. And again, we have already several training workshops on these things available on our YouTube channel. Okay, so how can you utilize this plan in your community? So you can talk about it or work through the different aspects in your Looking for Lincoln working group. You can do this at your historic site. Maybe you could do this with your board of directors or with your staff. You could talk about what stories you're already telling. Is there more stories that you could be telling? And is there new methods that you could use to tell those stories? We often think a lot about traditional exhibits and signs and things of that nature, but are there ways that you could tell your story in a more interactive way. And that would be my challenge to you today. So without any further ado, I have covered a lot of information in a relatively short amount of time. And it was a kind of overview of the Interp plan. So does anybody have any questions? I'm going to stop sharing so I can see people. Okay. Oh, great. All right. Does anybody have any questions? No. You all look very serious. Jan, you look very serious. Okay. No questions? Okay. All right. Well, I'm not going to make you ask me a question, but I would love a question. Ooh, Liz, you're going to ask me a question.
I have a question.
Go ahead, Liz.
Hi, everyone. I'm with the National Park Service National Heritage Area Program in Washington, and I'm kind of auditing this. I asked Heather if I could just hop on and kind of hear a little bit more about how a training is conducted and what type of information is in the Interp plan. So thanks, Heather, for having me. I was just wondering, I really liked the idea of how you have kind of these workshops to allow the partners to kind of think through it themselves and see how they can see development of these stories and how to tell these stories. And I'm wondering, was that something that was previously in your Interp plan, or how did that inclusion of those types of worksheets come into?
The worksheets were in our original interpretive plan. We didn't actually, when we modified things, mostly what we modified was like the interpretive. We tweaked, okay, the marketing plan was completely redone because what we had been doing in 2014 and what we're doing now are very different. So part 3 was completely, except for the worksheets, completely revamped, and some of the worksheets were tweaked. Part 1, we changed out some of our interpretive themes, or I would say we expanded them more than changed them. So that was a change in our interpretive thing, and then kind of how we're doing interpretation changed. But part 2, where we have the most worksheets, that was original from the 2014 work plan. And as much as I would like to take total credit for it, Candy from Silos and Smokestacks let us kind of take some of, not take, we, how do I like to say this? We were given permission to use their interpretive plan to make it our own, kind of. So we took elements of what they were doing, and they had the worksheet element, and we tweaked it to kind of do what we needed to do. So the worksheet idea was actually Silos and Smokestacks. We just adopted it for Abraham Lincoln National Heritage Area.
Okay.
Does that answer your question? Okay. Anybody else have a question? Hi, Jan. You look like you have a question.
I just wanted to say you did a great job, so that's probably why we don't have any questions.
Well, thanks, Jan.
And Liz, I'd just like to add that what I think makes these trainings so effective is the distances that we would have to cover to bring everybody together. So I really appreciate Heather and Sarah pulling this together, because we have had meetings with a variety of different partners throughout the heritage area, but some of them have to drive 2-3 hours one way to attend these. So this provides a much more effective, quick, I don't think it may give you the same quality as an in-person meeting, but certainly on a consistent basis, you can use this tool to get a message out that would just be impossible if you insisted on face-to-face meetings for all of this.
Yeah, thanks, Tim. I've heard that across multiple NHAs, especially over the past 2 years, on kind of a little bit of a silver lining in all of this is that they're actually able to connect more frequently or with more ease with existing partners, or finding new partners, or just the general public outside of even their NHA boundaries who have shown interest in the stories being told in their certain areas. So
Yeah, and I think these type of trainings also encourage the partners to talk to each other,
Right.
as opposed to if you only had 2 face-to-face meetings a year. So I think there's a lot of positive to this. I would not have thought of this before COVID, Liz, but I mean, you know, especially with Heather and Sarah with their effectiveness of this, I've really become a believer in this process.
Mhm. Yeah.
Mary Nell has a question, and she was just interested in what other Underground Railroad sites there are in addition to New Philadelphia. So Mary Nell, quickly, Alton has several, Jacksonville has several Underground Railroad sites. So does Quincy. Quincy has numerous, including the Richard Eels House, which you saw, which is a Network to Freedom site. So there's several, there are quite a few Underground Railroad sites throughout the Heritage area. There's some up in Ottawa, like way up north. So yeah. So anyway, if no one else has any questions, I'm not going to keep anybody because I'm sure we are all busy. I would like to thank you all for tuning in today for the workshop. And again, I am going to post it on our YouTube channel, soon, before the end of the week. So for anybody who missed it. So thank you all for coming and have a great rest of your day.